first read the great Jane Austen when I was a graduate student, which is to say that I was a late comer. Lo and behold, she blew my mind. I discovered, in fact, that like Keats being the great Shakespearean poet, that she actually was a Shakespearean novelist because she was preoccupied with freedom. First, it was ironic, full of wit. It shifts a bit and becomes more cognizant of social constraints. And it ends with this wonderful fusion of wisdom and wit.
Leaving cert course, which is what the final years in high school are called in Ireland, they put persuasion on. And it was an interesting time. It was before anybody started to say they're boys' books or girls' books, or they're Irish books or English books. So we didn't question for a single moment the fact that we were given this book to read, which was English, which was about girls, which was written by a woman. Almost from moment one, I found the books amused me, interested me, and I learned a lot about them, about the inwardness of good behavior, how that actually being someone who reflects a lot and remains silent a lot, that those sort of qualities were qualities to be recognized and to be appreciated. The idea of repose, the idea of some people being worthy of our full sympathy and others not, interested me greatly and still do.
It's quite muscular, her writing. It's not sort of dainty as people expect it to be. It's quite, it's tripping and it's light, but it's kind of taut and grown up. And I think one of the reasons people love her is that she's quite wicked, but she's not really viciously cruel. She's kind of sympathetic towards the people she's laughing at.
I think Austen's voice is, for me, the shortest distance between 2 points. Her use of language is extraordinary. I think it's actually unparalleled, and I don't think we read her right yet, read her correctly. She's very precise in her language, and I think for someone who's been in the sciences and mathematics, that precision of language, there's an extraordinary beauty about that.
From someone who has the mind of Jane Austen, any expression, especially any literary expression, would be of interest to me. I would be interested in anything. Any little scraps of paper you have lying around, where she jotted anything down, I would love to see them.
I'm completely amazed.
Take these out.
These are some great little notes. Oh my God. This is the first book. This letter is the earliest one in our collection. I see. 1796.
Yes, the devil, Lady Susan. Oh,
yes.
Here on the other side.
It's great you actually know it.
Well, I guess it's usually classed with the juvenilia.
My mother gave me Pride and Prejudice, and then Sense and Sensibility, the summer after I turned 13. I spent most of that summer reading and reading and reading. I loved both of those books deeply. I sometimes wonder now how I was able to understand them, but I understood enough to fall madly in love
with Elizabeth Bennet. And of course, I identified with her. A lot of her heroines don't know their own hearts, and then they have a revelation, Emma and Elizabeth in particular, and it's as if their feelings and their mind are suddenly come together in a kind of embodied experience.
You know what's great too is looking at the punctuation in the manuscript. Yeah. It's extremely interesting because of course it's a sign of the character.
Yes.
And they're numbered perfectly. That's
Yeah.
right. God, it's incredible. I have to do one thing.
When you look at a handwritten manuscript, you have a sensation of the body writing. And that is an extraordinary feeling.
When you're writing, you're using all of the parts of yourself that you know and many that you don't know. So it's coming onto the page is not an aspect of the self, but it's an aspect of the many parts of the self. And indeed, the more you work, the richer that self becomes. My dear Fanny, and doubly dear to me now, for dear sake, during her illness in writing those kind, amusing letters, at a time when I knew your feelings would have dictated so different a style. Oh, that's very important, isn't it? That your feelings have to be left out. You know, you don't. Jane believed in that, didn't she? Anything a writer does is interesting, but it's often interesting for not being interesting. As there is, I think, with any important writer, a way of always believing they had some secret which they managed to both conceal and disclose in their novels. I think that's what we all do in our fiction, is we spend our time concealing ourselves and actually disclosing ourselves.
This is one of her cross letters, I think, where she does the cross writing to save paper.
Oh, isn't it? Oh. I must start doing that.
You wouldn't want to read too many of those.
Oh, God, you could go cross-eyed. In Jane Austen, you would imagine that she knew how to keep certain things to herself and that she was deeply skilled at that and that she admired such skill and was unlikely to let it go.
She did it. That was like an M11. Yeah, so it would have started, let me see. She starts it here. It's like a puzzle.
The strangest things hit you. I was very struck by the size of the paper. I know that paper cost a lot of money. In her letters, she's writing around the edge and upside down and using every inch of space and writing in quite small writing because it was a precious thing, a piece of paper.
But she's writing here about lace patterns and shopping for hats.
Having been to her house at Chawton a couple of times, seeing the size of her dresses, the size of her shoes, the size of her writing table, the size of the windows she looked out at. It was a small, very concentrated, focused mind, I feel. And that gave me a little bit of a feeling of her. I don't mean a small mind in terms of pettiness by any means, but her canvas was small.
I don't know what the relationship is between a writer's life and their work. I think it's possible that that relationship is unique to each writer. There are many authors, certainly, who wrote letters knowing they would be published. You know, this is not really a letter. The letters that I saw at the Morgan are to her sister, and anyone who has a sister wouldn't expect the letters to be full of anything but gossip. I don't think authors are obligated to write their private correspondence for public consumption. I think, you know, a writer at the level of Austen, I'd like to read her shopping lists.
I think the letters of Jane Austen actually are quite interesting. I think that if you're looking for some grand philosophical reflection on method in literary expression, you're not going to find it, but you're going to find what was on the mind of this towering literary figure at particular moments, the ways in which she was actually occupying her time, and her own propensities towards what we'd call gossip, but really just kind of communication to others that she did not want to be revealed to others. I think that's always an interesting kind of eavesdropping that we experience when we read the letters of a great figure like Jane Austen.
For me, the manuscripts, the best part about them is that it shows that she was human after all, and it shows her craft. It didn't descend from outer space and kind of go away when she died at 41, but that there was a true craft and there was an appreciation of what she was doing and that process. And it was very hard and it was very laborious by her own manuscript hand in saying so. For those of us who look at that, it's a very gratifying humanity.
But I think the main satisfaction is not really that. It's the characters. Is that if you said you were going off for the weekend and you're doing nothing except, rereading Emma or taking Mansfield Park to bed, that image for me would be one of pure happiness. I mean, you could bring maybe a person to bed and that might be nicer in some way, but it wouldn't be as fully satisfying. One of the terrible things that happens is that you grow with a novel, you begin to imagine the characters, and you become the characters in Austen to some extent. You want the good ones to thrive, and you want to laugh at the ones that are sort of silly or comic.
People are always saying, oh, they're a comedy of manners. Well, a comedy of manners relies on specific manners, and of course, these novels take place during the time that Austen was writing. But they're also about perceiving other people and trying to read what's going on inside them. And dialogues, and I don't mean only spoken dialogues, but a kind of unspoken dialogue between people. And this is as pertinent and relevant today as it was then.
Any artist who has that, quality of timelessness has that quality because they tell the truth, so that obviously details change, but writers who date not because the details date, all details date. Writers date because their ideas date. And that means their ideas are wrong. Her perceptions don't date because they are correct, and they will remain that way, until human beings improve themselves intrinsically, and this will not happen.
If I were giving a dinner party and Austen was coming, I'd put Freud on one side of her and Jung on the other.
And I would want to include Mary Wollstonecraft.
I'd like to hear her and Charlotte Bronte talk about things.
If I had Jane Austen to dinner, I wouldn't invite anyone else.
Emily Dickinson, she didn't go out so much, but let's say that she did.
There's only one figure who would, I think, treat her in the way in which she deserved, and that's my dear Anton Chekhov.
And I would really lock them there for the evening, and I'd feed them quite a lot of alcohol. It'd be very interesting to know what Austen would make of Freud as she discovered slowly what Freud actually was proposing.
Just think, at the young age of 41 years old, she's already dead. And yet she has reached the Shakespearean level in terms of the novel that the Emma Woodhouse in that classic of 1815 would be on the road to Emma Bovary of Flaubert. That it would be impossible for Charles Dickens. It would be difficult even for the great Russian tradition to fuse social description and psychological observation within that genre of the novel without building on Jane Austen. So I would thank her, I would express my gratitude, and I would say, my dear sister, can I get a hug? And I think I would hug her without permission anyway.